From the National Newsroom of the Canadian Press, I'm Karen Rebo. U.S. federal investigators are trying to establish whether there is a formal link between New Orleans truck attack suspect Shamsuddin Jabbar and ISIS. An Army veteran drove a rented pickup truck through busy Bourbon Street after New Year's celebrations early Wednesday, and the carnage is a lot. ABC's Christiane Cordero has more.
Surveillance video shows the truck flying an ISIS flag coming down Canal Street around 3:15 a.m. before turning onto Bourbon and speeding into the crowd. They say he was speeding down Bourbon wearing body armor and firing an AR-style rifle out of the truck, racing about 3 blocks before crashing, stepping out and opening fire again, wounding 2 police officers.
Police then fatally shot him, but not before he'd killed 15 people and injured dozens of others. The BC teen hospitalized with avian flu is no longer contagious and has been taken off oxygen. The teen's infection was the first human case of H5N1 avian flu acquired in Canada. Canadian Press reporter Jason White has more.
Health officials updated the teen's condition in a letter to the editors of the New England Journal of Medicine. The patient is a 13-year-old girl with underlying health conditions. She went to an emergency room November 4th with a fever and eye infection, but was discharged without treatment. She later went back to hospital and ended up in intensive care at BC Children's Hospital. Officials say she came off oxygen December 18th.
The source of the girl's H5N1 exposure has not yet been determined. A recent study says endangered North Atlantic right whales should live well past 100, but they're dying at around age 22. Scott Krause, a research scientist emeritus from New England Aquarium, says the paper published in the journal Science Advances is another way of reporting that the North Atlantic right whale is in serious trouble.
This population is in such deep trouble from human activities that if things don't turn around, it will go extinct.
University of Alaska Fairbanks professor and lead author Greg Breed says animals that have survived a century or more have wisdom that younger ones don't, like knowing how to find food in changing ocean conditions. And the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says 2023 was the third biggest year for CEO compensation since it began tracking executives' pay 16 years ago. Senior economist David McDonald says that's down somewhat from the record earnings CEOs got the previous 2 years, but still high by historical standards.
CEOs made about 50 times the average worker in the 80s. In the previous 2 years, it was closing in on 250 times. Now we're down to 210 times.
The CCPA's report says by 10:54 this morning, Canada's 100 highest paid CEOs will have each made an average of more than $62,000. That's the average annual income for a Canadian worker. This is the Canadian Press. In sports, Canada is making a change to its lineup for tonight's quarterfinal matchup against Czechia at the World Junior Hockey Championship in Ottawa. NHL high draft prospect Porter Martone will dress after sitting out the last 2 games. Head coach Dave Cameron doesn't yet know who will draw out of the lineup. Canada finished third in Group A after losses to Latvia and the U.S. in the preliminary round. The New Orleans Pelicans are grieving the 15 people killed and many others injured in their NBA city when a man drove a truck into a crowd of New Year's revelers on Bourbon Street early Wednesday. The Miami Heat held a pregame moment of silence for victims before scoring a win against the Pelicans. The Toronto Raptors snapped an 11-game losing skid with a 130-113 win over the Brooklyn Nets. And in curling, Rachel Homan and Brendan Bottcher are into the playoffs at the Canadian Mixed Doubles Curling Trials in Liverpool, Nova Scotia. Brittany Tran and Ryan Kleider also qualified out of Pool A. From the Canadian Press, I'm Karen Rebo.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. For more of today's top stories, visit thecanadianpressnews.ca.